I used to get a call from my mom every single night at exactly 8:15, no matter what was going on in my life. Your one click can keep these stories alive. Subscribe, because every voice deserves to be heard. Because hearing her voice felt like everything was still okay. But then one night the call didn't come, and I told myself she was just tired, until the next night passed in the same silence, and the one after that too, and something deep inside me started to feel wrong because my mom never forgot me, not like that. When I called the nursing home, they brushed it off too quickly, saying she was resting more. But when I finally went to see her, she didn't look sick, just quiet like someone had dimmed her from the inside. And when I asked why she stopped calling, she smiled in a way that didn't reach her eyes and said she must have forgotten. And that's when I knew she was hiding something. So the next morning, I did something I never thought I would do. I installed a hidden camera in her room because whatever was happening there, I needed to see it for myself. And I had no idea what I was about to uncover. I didn't watch the footage right away. I told myself I was overreacting, that there had to be a simple explanation. But that night at exactly 8:10, I sat down, opened the app, and pressed play, my heart already racing before anything even happened. At first, it was normal, painfully normal nurses walking in and out, checking charts, adjusting blankets, my mom sitting quietly by the window like she always did, her hands folded in her lap, waiting, always waiting. And then at 8:12, just like the nights I had missed her calls, the door opened again. But this time it was different. The nurse who walked in didn't greet her, didn't smile, didn't even look at her like a person, just a task, something to manage, something to control. And I felt this instant tension in my chest as I leaned closer to the screen. My mom looked up, hopeful, her voice soft. Is it time for my call? And for a split second, I thought maybe I was wrong. Maybe everything would be fine. But the nurse didn't answer her question. She walked straight to the side table, picked up my mom's phone, and turned the screen off like it didn't matter, like it wasn't a lifeline. And then she said, flat and cold, "You don't need to call anyone tonight." And I actually froze, my hand tightening around my own phone as I replayed that line in my head because it didn't make sense. It wasn't protocol, it wasn't care, it was control. My mom blinked, confused, her fingers twitching slightly as if she wanted to reach for the phone, but didn't. "But I always call my daughter," she said, her voice smaller than I had ever heard it. And the nurse sighed, annoyed, like this was an inconvenience, like my mom's routine was something to be corrected. "You're too dependent," she replied, placing the phone inside the drawer and closing it with a quiet click that somehow sounded louder than anything else in the room. "It's not healthy." And that was the moment something inside me shifted, something cold and focused. Because this wasn't care. This wasn't concern. This was someone slowly deciding what my mom was allowed to feel, allowed to do, allowed to keep. The footage kept going, and I couldn't look away, even when I wanted to, because what I saw next was worse. Not louder, not more dramatic, but quieter, more controlled, more intentional, the kind of behavior that hides behind routine. The nurse standing there just long enough to make sure my mom wouldn't protest, watching her like she expected obedience. And my mom, she didn't argue, she didn't push back. She just nodded slowly, like she had learned that resisting would only make things harder. And that broke something in me in a way I didn't expect, because this wasn't fear in the obvious sense. It was something softer, more dangerous. It was conditioning. I checked the next clip, then the next, then the next. Each night the same pattern, the same timing, the same quiet removal of her voice from the world. And I realized this wasn't a one-time thing. This was a system, a routine designed to isolate her piece by piece until not calling me felt normal, until silence replaced connection, and no one questioned it. And the worst part was how easy it would have been to miss, how easy it almost was for me to believe their words instead of my instincts. I remember sitting there in complete silence after the footage ended, my mind racing, but my emotions strangely steady, like everything had narrowed down into one clear decision, because I wasn't going to storm and screaming. I wasn't going to give them the chance to dismiss me as emotional or confused. No, if they wanted control, I would show them what real control looked like. So the next morning I got dressed like it was any other day, walked into that same building, greeted the front desk with a calm smile, and asked to speak to administration, my voice even, my posture steady. And when the nurse saw me in the hallway, she smiled like nothing had ever happened, like she hadn't been quietly erasing my presence from my mom's life every single night. Your mother is doing very well, she said, the same rehearsed tone, the same empty reassurance. And for a moment, I just looked at her, really looked at her, wondering how many times she had said that to families who didn't know better, who trusted too easily, who didn't have proof. I didn't respond right away. I just reached into my bag, took out my phone, and held it between us, my thumb hovering over the screen for a second before I pressed play. And as her own voice filled the silence, repeating those same cold words, "You don't need to call anyone tonight," I watched her expression change, the confidence draining from her face so quickly it almost didn't feel real, her eyes flickering between me and the screen, searching for an explanation that didn't exist. "This is a misunderstanding," she said, but her voice lacked the certainty it had before, and I finally spoke, calm, steady, unshaken. "No," I said quietly, "this is a pattern," and that word hung in the air heavier than anything else, because patterns are harder to deny, harder to excuse, and I could see it in her face. The moment she realized this wasn't just one clip, this wasn't just one complaint, this was something bigger, something documented, something undeniable. "I can explain," she tried again, but I shook my head slightly, not angry, not loud, just done. "You won't need to," I replied, just as the door behind us opened and administration walked in, their expressions shifting the second they saw the tension in the room, the phone still playing, the evidence still speaking for itself. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt since the call stopped. Not relief, not yet, but control, real control, the kind that doesn't need to raise its voice to be heard, the kind that comes from knowing exactly what's happening and refusing to let it continue. And as the nurse stood there, silent now, her earlier authority completely gone, I realized something that made everything else fall into place. They had no idea how much I had seen, how much I had saved, how far I was willing to go to protect my mom. And that was the moment the balance shifted, quietly, completely, and permanently. The investigation was quick, almost too quick, like they already knew something wasn't right. The nurse was removed, apologies were given, policies promised, but I didn't care about any of that. I only cared about my mom, sitting beside her again at 8:15 as her phone finally rang, her real smile returning as if a piece of her had been given back. And in that quiet moment, I understood something clearly. I didn't need to fight loudly to protect her. I just needed to pay attention and act when it mattered, because in the end, they didn't lose me, they lost the chance to ever control her again.